guys, so I decided that I want to start doing some singular book dedicated reviews for books that I have either a lot of thoughts on, or I felt like I wasn't able to give my full thoughts and opinions on them at the time that I originally talked about them. So the first book that I really want to dive a little bit more deeply into is Phantasma by Kaylee Smith. So Phantasma is a book about a girl named Ophelia whose mother passes away and she inherits her mother's magic. That's basically how their family works. Magic is passed from the eldest matriarch of the family to the next eldest matriarch of the family once the previous one has passed away. So Ophelia is the next eldest in the line. So she inherits her mother's magic. And with her mother's magic, she also finds out that she has inherited her mother's debt as well. And she is now the head of the household, the head of her magical family, and her sister Genevieve decides that she wants to help her sister out. She feels like her sister has always had the weight of the world on her shoulders, and she really wants to be able to contribute a little bit more to her family. So Genevieve decides to go into Phantasma, which is a mysterious, dark sort of competition. This house appears in multiple cities around the world, but just one city at a time. And in this house, the people who decide to go into Phantasma are agreeing to go through a trial of 9 levels where they could face death in order to be granted a singular wish. So when Ophelia finds that her sister has disappeared and that Phantasma is in town, she thinks that she knows where her sister is, and she decides to join Phantasma as well in order to save her sister, because as the new matriarch of her family, and it's only been like 2 days, she feels like she's already failing, so she must go and save her sister. And when she goes to Phantasma to attempt to find her sister, she starts to understand that these trials are a lot more dangerous and deadly than she ever would have thought. And although you are warned that making deals with demons and associating with these mythical creatures could get you in a lot of trouble, Ophelia decides that her only real hope to saving her sister is to make a deal with one of these creatures. So she goes into Phantasma, and she might even fall in love there. So this book, that was my own little synopsis. I hope it does it justice. I enjoyed this book quite a bit, particularly the first half of this book. I felt like we were given just the right amount of information throughout the book in order to really understand what's going on with the trials, kind of understand how this world works, but we were not given too much information to where it caused more questions, because this is a very small scale fantasy story. We're dealing with a small, well, not small, but a mansion full of people in a competition. We don't need to know how the entire world works. So when authors do these smaller scale things and start introducing too much of the world to the story, it can sometimes make it so that you feel like you're given too much information, but also not enough information at the same time, because you're like, well, why is this relevant? So I felt like Kaylee Smith did a really great job of balancing how much information you get. I also really loved the trial aspect of this book. I have not read very many books with trial aspects to them. The only ones that I can really think of are like Hunger Games, but Hunger Games is kind of not really the same sort of trial. They're not going to trial 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 like this, where you have reprieves in between trials. The other books that I'm thinking of are like Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire and The Serpent and the Wings of Night. The Serpent and the Wings of Night would be the one that I could compare to this book the most, because it's the most recent released book of those ones that I just mentioned, and it is also a fantasy romance. And I definitely think that Kaylee Smith did a better job with the trial aspect and just kind of the balance of the story with Phantasma than Carissa Broadbent did with The Serpent and the Wings of Night. I believe I've talked about it before, where I've always felt like The Serpent and the Wings of Night was not fleshed out well enough, and it either needed more or less in order for the story to work a little bit better. In that book, I felt like the trials, there was way too much downtime in between the trials and not enough significant character development or plot development happened within those downtimes. So it led the momentum of the story to kind of fall by the wayside in between each of the trials. With this book, I felt like the downtime between trials was like the perfect amount of time. We got maybe like 2 or 3 chapters in between each trial, and things were happening, whether that be character development, plot development, or just development of the world as a whole. And so I really did enjoy this book. Now, where this book kind of started to falter a little bit and why I ultimately ended up giving this book 3 out of 5 stars instead of my initial thought of giving it 4 or 4.5 out of 5 stars is that I felt like after probably like the 60 or 70% mark, that great pacing kind of changed up a little bit. More specifically, after the 7th trial, I felt like the story kind of took a turn that was anticipated. However, I felt as though that turn that it took ended up making the plot progress way too quickly with very little time to breathe, when at the beginning half of the book we had a lot of time to breathe. And I know that typically with books, you know, we reach the climax of the book towards the end and things are going at a breakneck pace. However, with how these trials were set up and with how many trials were left, I felt like that breakneck pace that ended up happening in, like I said, the last like 30 to 40% of the book was kind of incongruent with the rest of the story. So ultimately, like I said, I gave this book a 3 out of 5 stars. I also felt like the romance was a little bit too shallow, and even though I felt like I kind of understood Ophelia's, like, not obsession, but her infatuation with Blackwell, after I looked up what the fan art of him looked like, I still felt like the romance was a little bit too shallow for me to really be convinced that these characters were willing to sacrifice the things that they sacrificed for each other. So that is the end of my spoiler-free portion of the review. So if you have not read the book and you do not want to be spoiled, please click away. Now for spoilers. So, like I said, enjoyed the pacing and the plot of this book for the first 60%. And then after that, I didn't quite love all of the things that were happening. So in the vlog of me reading this book and my final thoughts, I did mention the fact that I felt like time was used kind of not very well in the first half of the book, and I still do think that, even though I did say that I like the pacing of the book. With hindsight, I see that there are definitely some things that could have been taken out. I think a lot of her interactions with some of the competitors in the competition could have been left out a little bit. At the beginning of the book, I had suspected that Ophelia would start making alliances with some of these people, and that's why we were being introduced to them and why we would have like some more in-depth interactions with some of them. However, that did not really end up happening. It kind of did, but not enough to kind of justify the amount of time that was spent, specifically with, I think her name was Lillian or something. I felt like, and still, it wasn't a ton of time spent with this person, but with what I know now about the pacing issues that I have at the end, where I felt like things moved way too quickly and things were happening way too conveniently, I felt like we could have spared some time in the beginning. So that is one of my major critiques of the book. My second major critique of the book is how information was given to us. So when I first started reading this book, I really liked how it seemed as though we were going into this house, and this house was going to tell us a story that would solve and answer a lot of questions that our character had. And while technically it did do that, it did it in a way that was a lot less satisfying than I thought it would be. So when Ophelia first gets into the house and interacts with Blackwell, they have contention. She's not a fan of him. She doesn't want to make a deal with a phantom. She's been told her whole life not to do things like that. However, she's in a desperate situation right now. She really needs to be able to make it to level 7 in order to, or make it to level 8 in order to be able to make sure that her sister is safe. So she asks Blackwell, or she agrees to help Blackwell get out of this house because he's trapped in Phantasma. He has limited memory. He doesn't know why he's trapped there. Ophelia has more information about how to get him set free than he even has. So he asks for her assistance. And if she does not, if she's not able to free him, then she owes him 10 years off of her life. So those are pretty high stakes, right? So my major issue with how information was given is that once she agrees to help Blackwell find this key and this heart to set him free, she starts to explore the castle, but not really. The only real scenes that we get of her exploring the castle is when she's in the library and they find that secret hidden room where she sees the name Gabriel etched in the floor. I believe the name is Gabriel. I might be wrong. Etched in the floor, and there's an air of mystery of like, who is Gabriel? Why is his name etched there? That's the same name that her sister had written in her journal. Like, what's up with that? So I was thinking, oh my gosh, she's gonna keep on searching for this key and this heart in the house, and we're slowly going to get more information. Like maybe she stumbles upon one of these mysterious rooms because she's kind of teleported from rooms before. Maybe she stumbles upon another room and she learns a little bit more information, and that's one more piece of the puzzle. And then maybe she talks to another phantom or another ghost and she gets a third piece to the puzzle, and this puzzle is slowly starting to come together. That is not how this book really did that. Instead, there were a lot of scenes of her and Blackwell hooking up or having a disagreement, her being resistant to being with him being resistant to being with her, and there was very little actual investigations and looking for this key and this heart. I felt as though the stakes were very low in that regard, because of her lack of urgency to find the key and the heart, and she looked only a handful of times. I think 2 or 3 times she looked for this in the span of 8 days. I felt like there was no way that he was actually going to take 10 years off of her life based on the lack of urgency, and I ended up being correct. And then with the mystery with the name Gabriel, and again, I can't remember if that is the exact name, but I'm pretty sure it is. I felt like we were given those little breadcrumbs, and then towards the end, Sinclair just tells her, hey, you might want to check out page number blah, blah, blah in the Phantasma logbook and ask Blackwell why he's keeping that from you. And then we're given the entire backstory to that name, to her mother, to her father, all in one sitting. And I just felt like that was kind of not a very satisfying way to give us all that information. I felt like we needed to have a couple more breadcrumbs really to make it more intriguing, because I felt like I didn't care as much as I should have, because that tension never really built up enough for the reveal of the information to be as satisfying as I would have wanted it to be. So that's one other disappointment that I had. And then I talk a lot about how after the 7th trial, I felt like the story just moved with very little fanfare, with very little regard for the mysteries. Everything was kind of just wrapped up in bows, and things were happening for plot convenience. I felt like the twist in the end where Blackwell ended up being the head demon of the house was very predictable. I felt like the chapter with his backstory, that was him being banished to Phantasma, I didn't really like how that was handled either. I feel like it would have been a lot more powerful if perhaps there was lore at the headings of the chapters throughout the whole book that alluded to this event, and we finally got the full picture once we knew exactly who Blackwell was. If you don't really understand what I'm saying, I mean, like, if you've ever read like the Mistborn series, in the Mistborn series, above the chapter there are excerpts from a book that kind of tell the tale of a specific character, and they give you little tidbits of information, and throughout the story, as you're reading each chapter heading, you start to get more and more little seeds of information, and then parts of that are fully addressed towards the end of the book. I felt like that would have been a really cool device to use in this book to make me care more about what happened to Blackwell. I just felt like I was being told what to feel as opposed to me actually organically coming up with these feelings. I felt the same way too with how she was able to skip straight to level 9 after she finished level 8. It just didn't, I feel like I would have been more satisfied if she made it all the way to level 9 and actually rightfully won, and then she went and met with the leader of Phantasma and then found out that it was Blackwell and had her interactions with him. I just, like I said, it's sounding like I'm ragging a lot on this book. I did like this book a lot. I just felt like things could have been done better to build a lot more tension and to make things a lot more satisfying. I am going to still continue with this series because I did really like the writing at the beginning, and I feel like, as with anything, the more that Kaylee Smith writes, the better she'll get, and maybe I'll like Enchantra a lot more than I liked Phantasma. So yeah, I don't know. I liked this book a lot towards the beginning and had quite a few issues towards the end. However, this was still a very good read, and I would recommend Phantasma if you're looking for a nicely paced, towards the beginning, a nicely paced book that's a fun read. So thank you so much for watching this video. I've been having a hard time talking today. I'm like tongue-tied, but I was able to make it through this one. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, don't sweat the small stuff. Bye.